The following program is being presented to you by a community producer. The statements, views, and opinions expressed are not necessarily those of ALC TV or the City of Avon Lake.
Welcome to Common Sense. The Common Sense program is a series of shows that feature interviews with very interesting people so that we can learn in a clear, concise, and direct way who these folks are, what they do, and what makes sense to them and what doesn't. I'm Rudy Breglia, and today I'll be interviewing the wise and experienced Tony Cillo, and he is now the Associate Director of the Lorain County Drug Task Force, and he's also a candidate for Lorain County Prosecutor. Welcome, Tony, to Common Sense.
Thanks, Rudy. I appreciate that.
Okay, well, Tony, why don't you start us off? Give us some background, where you were born, where you've lived. What brings you to this part of Lorain County?
I was actually born, at St. Joseph's Hospital,
Okay.
but I've been in Avon Lake pretty much my whole life.
Okay.
My dad has been here for 72 out of the 82 years he's been alive. My mom's from Avon, so we're all from the area, basically.
Natives.
I graduated from Avon Lake High School in 1984, actually, and I went to Bowling Green State University for my undergrad and to Case Western for law school.
Okay. Why did you pursue a career in the law?
Well, that's the funny part. I started off as an accounting and finance major, and
Okay.
I got more attached to the classes that were political science based and that were pre-law, so I began to switch more and more, and I had a very good professor at Bowling Green that stimulated me into wanting to go into that area, so that's where I concentrated.
Okay. Did you have a role model for that?
Yeah, the BG professor, Stephen Ludd, was a lawyer. He had graduated from Syracuse. He had actually played a little bit of professional basketball, so I gravitated towards that, and he treated it like going to law school.
Okay. Tell us about the steps in your career.
When I first got out of law school, it was a terrible market in 1993.
Okay.
So I was on my own for a while in downtown Cleveland.
Okay.
I did like of-council stuff for the Cleveland Tenants Organization, working for office space in 75 Public Square. I got a job as the assistant law director in Avon Lake in 1994. And then I joined a small firm in Avon Lake for a while, and then the prosecutor's office kind of called me out of the blue because at that time the prosecutor was Greg White, and he had been to speak at Case because he was on a committee with one of my professors. So my professor had called without me knowing.
Okay. What was the most surprising thing about being a prosecutor?
It's the pace.
Okay.
It is nonstop, and you feel very attached to the people that have been victimized,
Okay.
and you don't want to make them wait.
Okay.
And you also spend a lot of time trying to find witnesses, make your cases better, so it can be very demanding that way.
Okay. Tell us about an interesting case. I know you've had many.
Probably what I would consider the worst case I've had to deal with was Nicole Dyer. She had been burned up as a child.
Okay.
When she was 4 years old. Flammable Pajamas had won a very large lawsuit.
Oh.
And then her son was the victim of being murdered and burned up in her house at the very same age.
Oh.
It was the first death penalty case I had tried at that point. And so there were a lot of parallels with regard to that.
Mm-hmm. Was prosecuting a juvenile different than handling an adult?
Yeah, there are no jury trials when you're doing with juvenile unless there's kind of a specification that's put on there. So that's different, and magistrates tend to be more lenient on what you're allowed to bring in and not bring in. And the focus is on rehabilitation solely at that point in the best interest and not punishment. So
Okay.
yes, it's different.
Understand. What makes a good prosecutor?
I think somebody that cares about the people that they're dealing with, does not expect to get rich doing it, and has a good memory and is fairly quick on their feet.
Well, what best prepared you for being a good prosecutor, which I know you are?
My father. I don't think I could win an argument with my father without documenting what was wrong. So I think I was born and bred to actually be a lawyer in the end.
I see. Right from the home. Is it sometimes difficult to maintain objectivity in a case?
You can get tunnel vision in a case because you've spoken to the victims and the witnesses, but in the end, when you go through and get ready to actually go to trial, I find that I would always see the weaknesses in my case more and what I would do if I was defending it, so I think that brings your rate back down.
Okay. What are the responsibilities of the Lorain County Chief Prosecutor?
The elected official you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, he's in charge of not just the criminal division, there's the juvenile division, there's children's services, which they contract with to handle their cases, the same with child support, and you have the civil division, which you also have to represent all the townships and the various agencies and judges and everything like that. So you are the figurehead, but you also have to have the knowledge to understand where everything is going in all those different divisions, and you have to be accessible.
Okay. And you have experience in essentially all those different...
Right. Yes, I do.
Okay. How large is the staff for Lorain County?
Well, when I was still working there, which was about 2.5 years ago at this point, it was 80 to 85, because there'd be some come and go, with 33 attorneys. I know they've lost, from my understanding, 20 in like the last year.
Okay.
So I don't know how many they've replaced or not.
Okay. Are elections the best way to choose a county prosecutor?
I think either appointment or elections both have their strengths or weaknesses at this point. Appointing sometimes can lead to who your best friend is.
Right, your buddy.
And elections can sometimes make things just a popularity contest and not about who's most qualified.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's important to actually get the message out on who you are and give somebody an opportunity to learn more about you.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully this will
I'm
help.
hoping, yes.
Now, to switch gears a little bit, do TV crime shows depict the actual way homicides evolve in the justice system?
Some of them do, better than others. I think it's true that the first 48 hours is the most important, but some will come later because somebody almost always has to tell somebody what they did, and when that person gets into trouble, they want to use that sometime as a chip to barter with. And that's where you end up with some plea bargains because the murder is more important than the felony of the third degree under some circumstances. The rules of evidence in the courtroom stuff, no. Law and Order with their 2-minute closing arguments, no.
I see. What's the most difficult crime to prosecute?
Domestic violence.
Yeah.
There is a problem with domestic violence is that they are usually dependent upon the people that they're going after for the money that it takes to live, and they're afraid of losing that. It's also a loved one. If they have kids, it's going to hurt them going after the other parent. So while they're reported, you get a lot of times not a lot of cooperation. They're afraid.
Very complicated, I could hear.
Yeah, what we were taught to do is to try to prepare it like it's a murder and the victim's not there because you may not see them.
Understand. Do you interact with legislators or the coroner often in your activities? Does that happen?
Well, for the last 20 years that I prosecuted, I dealt with all murder cases primarily. So I dealt with the coroners, three different ones, a lot. Dr. Evans, Dr. Mattis, and Dr. Miller now.
Right.
Legislators, I have dealt with some of them, but the elected prosecutor, This current one doesn't seem to do much. There's an organization called the Ohio Prosecuting Attorneys Association.
Yeah.
And that is used part legislative. They actually have somebody that will go and it will set people up to testify in front of committees as you try to change laws that there are problems with. Because, I mean, laws are written, but they don't see the holes in them till later on. So you go and they testify and they band together in the 88 counties to use political capital to try to change things to benefit the victims.
Mm-hmm. Are we winning the war on drugs?
I think basically we're stemming the tide at times. It's hard to win when you just make it more expensive and there's more people willing to take the risk. I can tell you from this job that I do now that the amount of overdose deaths are up some.
Yeah.
But the amount of overdose that have been reported where people live are down almost 200 this year. So in that way, I guess we're doing some things, or it could be that people have learned to use Narcan on themselves so there aren't as many calls. Fentanyl was just something that nobody saw coming. I can recall the first weekend working there, we couldn't figure out what was going on. There were almost 26 overdoses.
Right.
And we thought somebody had robbed a lab. We didn't realize that they were just manufacturing it. We were on the phone with toxicologists out of the coroner's office in Cleveland, and we found out, it was just so strong.
Understand. What have you learned about dealing with illicit drug sale and use crimes? What have you learned about that?
Well, that they are also the gateway many times for addicts for burglaries and theft offenses and property crimes. So there's a comorbidity to those two, that they are cause and effect.
Okay.
So that if you can affect one positively, you can lower your crime stats in a whole separate category. Understand.
Are there more successful alternate approaches to dealing with drug violations?
I think if you can get people to accept help, but you're not going to get them to accept help by just threatening them with illegal consequences. They've got to actually want help. One of the things that I'm involved with now is grants that are for the Drug Task Force. Is when somebody overdoses, within 72 hours, we go out, talk to the families, provide Narcan kits, and try to give them the skills and the contacts that they can begin to change their lives. And some people want that and others don't. Mm-hmm. I think it's the same with the court system and the recovery court that John Maraldi currently runs.
Okay, so the families are involved more.
You got to have a support system. Sometimes I think it's best that people leave the area and get away from the people that they're most likely to offend with and the people that they know to buy drugs from.
Understand. What has been learned from states that have legalized the use of marijuana?
One, it doesn't make as much money as they thought it was going to.
I see. The taxes.
I mean, from Ohio, everybody still drove to Michigan because they were still cheaper. Some of it has not been bad. I think that, people that actually have medical problems and stuff like that it's become more well known. We had people moving all the way to Colorado because their daughter would have epilepsy and that. But as for the rest of it, it's so much stronger than even when I was younger. Is what I've learned. It could be 100 times stronger than that at this point. So the driving becomes a very serious issue.
Right. They just don't have the ability to control the car as well.
Correct. So you end up with more aggravated vehicular homicides instead.
What effects would be expected in our society if all drugs of abuse were legalized?
I think they're trying that approach in either Washington or Oregon right now, and they're not having very good luck with it. Because even legalized, you still have to buy them and do other things. They're not giving them out. I mean, they may give out needles or something so that people don't get diseases, but the same things are happening, and it's just they end up with a large homeless population because they figure they could go there, and so.
Understand. Why are crimes of violence increasing, and what can we do to prevent that happening in our area?
Well, again, I guess that goes to education. The problem that cannot be fixed is that we are rightly and innocent until proven guilty society.
Okay.
Which means we adapt to what happened, not so much to the prevention
Okay.
of stopping it, because, I mean, there's a movie called The Minority Report where they can read the thoughts and
Yeah,
they know
right,
somebody's
right.
going to do
We
it.
can't do that, yeah.
We can't do that, but you can tell that sometimes an individual, whether has been in there for violence against a spouse like repeatedly, and if you can get them some help, because there are a lot of women that end up being victims of murder from spouses, and you can see it going. That's why they have the silent witnesses that they all are cut out of all the old murders that they used to put at the courthouse.
Uh-huh. How successful are prosecutions of violent crimes in Lorain County? Do you have a handle on that?
It used to be pretty successful. I still talk to people that are involved. They've had more issues lately. We used to have police statistics. I was the head of the criminal division for 12 years.
Okay.
My police statistics were basically 85% to the indictment, which means that's a combination of things. It means you're indicting exactly what you can prove. You're not over-indicting, trying to plead, and you are staying in touch with your victims and your witnesses so you can produce them for trial.
Okay.
Which is the most important thing. Now they're pleading things at 54%, which would tell me that I think they're pleading cases that are better and trying cases that are worse, which is the exact opposite model than you want to be involved in.
Okay, so you would help that, you're in office?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have the institutional knowledge to pass on. I could still be involved in trying a couple of cases, and after 27 years of working in that office, I had a lot of different ideas to implement that I would do that weren't done with other people.
Understand. Are there changes, and this goes back to something we talked about before, are there changes in the present laws regarding homicide and other crimes of violence that would aid in their successful prosecution, help you in doing your job?
That ebbs and flows. I mean, it's harder to get statements in now when the Supreme Court had ruled on confronting witnesses and certain exceptions left.
Okay.
Under a case called Crawford. But it's really up to the judges. Sometimes you have to do distasteful things by asking for material witnesses warrants is because to get witnesses to show up. So it's whether the court is willing to actually provide that mechanism to you to have people present.
Understand. Are victims and accused rights balanced under the law in your estimation?
I think the best you can with Marcys Law now in place and a constitutional amendment that they have to be included in decisions and the rest of it. I mean, you still have the prosecutorial ability to do something on your own, but they have to be included in the process, which means you're at least talking through things and explaining things a lot better on why we're doing things and making them part of the process. At trial, it's always going to focus on the accused and what their rights are with a court. So I think there's a balance that way.
Okay. Are penalties more severe if violence is involved in the commission of a crime?
In some regards, we are not a state with harsh penalties.
Okay.
Things like, for instance, involuntary manslaughter, killing somebody, that is not a mandatory crime in Ohio. You go to Indiana, it would be 15 years. Same with voluntary. Attempted rape, if it's not a child, is not a mandatory prison term in Ohio. So
I see.
There was a focus based upon budgets for quite a while to get out non-violent offenders so there would be room for more violent offenders, and that's when they started what's called TCAP, which would be, if you signed up for it, the judges don't have the discretion to send certain crimes to prison that are felonies, F4s and F5s, first offenses, and stuff like that. So there is a focus towards trying to hold more violent criminals accountable.
I see. Should police officers have qualified immunity to avoid personal liability for their on-duty lawful actions?
I believe so. I mean, I had to handle with the Attorney General's office and in Lorain County a number of cases that would involve police officer stuff. And we tried some that were charged that were clearly outside their jobs and the rest of it. And quite frankly, getting people to do those jobs without some kind of protection and just being in court all the time, it's going to be very difficult.
Understand. Do viable alternatives exist for cash bail?
Yes, but that depends on the individual. I mean, I know they passed the Bail Reform Act and it went through, and then it got taken out by another constitutional amendment where certain things, you could only do it on flight, no matter what the crime was going to be. And now the safety of the community became, again, something that got codified, which is important. Yeah, I mean, strangely, if somebody has put up their parents' house as bail, that seems to get them more to come, because then a bail bondsman.
Yeah, I see, understand. How can the rights of poor defendants be assured? Is there a double standard in the justice system?
Some of the best lawyers I deal with were court appointed. They took regular cases and court appointed. I don't think it's so much as whether it's court appointed, unless you're going to hire an army of lawyers and just keep the other side busy. I do think there are very good lawyers that do court-appointed work. We do not have a public defender's office in Lorain County. We do things by court appointments.
Okay.
Which means they pay them so much an hour to do these things. But the belief of defendants in listening to jail calls is unless they've paid them, they're not working for them. So I think more of it is the perception on whether they'll believe their advice because they don't have skin in the game by having paid money.
I got you. How can we deal with flash looting of jewelry stores and other high-end stores that you see on television, and it's a really difficult situation?
It's what kind of infrastructure you can build and what kind of systems you have to find out who did it or stop people from actually being able to enter. Mm-hmm. Alarm systems, it's about all you can do with it.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a really broad question, but why do some people act as criminals? Is it opportunity, moral deficiencies?
I don't know. Some of them become members of gangs, and that whole basis is based upon a gang culture where you do certain things. Uh-huh. I've always believed if people worked at legitimate things as hard as they worked at some of the things that are criminal. They would be very successful. Sometimes they are incredibly intelligent people.
Okay.
That just, the lure of dealing drugs for the money that you're going to make compared to working a 9-to-5 job, whether it's somewhere smaller that might be considered McDonald's, even with the upping, or up to, a middle management job, you're not going to make as much money and as much status as you can live at that age. And I think the younger people they're
Makes
more
it attractive.
And they're risk takers when you're younger.
Uh-huh. Does punishment deter crime?
Some crime.
Okay.
A crime of anger is probably not going to be deterred by punishment. You're not thinking about anything else at that time. I think fear of getting caught deters crime.
Okay.
More, and the punishment is the result of getting caught.
All right. What percent of criminals rehabilitate and become productive citizens? Do you have any handle on that?
No, not particularly. There have been a number that have done quite well, mm-hmm. but there's a lot I've seen back again.
Once again, yeah.
From juvenile, I would see him in adult, of course.
I see. Should convicted felons have the right to vote restored in Ohio?
Once their rights are restored, yeah. That is to presume that they've actually been rehabilitated at that point, that they've gone through to get the restoration of rights. So, the job of the prosecutor is to enforce laws, and if that's the law, then yeah. Okay. I think it's a danger to be the elected prosecutor and to try to only enforce the laws that you think are good. Because that's not what you were put there to do. You were put there to enforce all the laws, and those came from a separate branch of government.
Okay.
So then you're legislating at that point.
Understand. And this is another off-the-wall question, do criminals frequently confess because of their own moral conscience? Do they say, oh, gee, I did do a bad thing and I'm going to confess?
That does happen. More likely, they try to explain things and will confess to the crime while trying to minimize why it happened, is what I saw mostly.
Okay. How can Avon Lakers support your election efforts? Do you need volunteers?
I will need volunteers. I certainly can't win an election on my own. I will need sign locations. I'm going to have some fundraisers, stuff I don't enjoy doing at all. But
understand. Now, how can someone get in touch with you? Do you have a phone?
Yep, I've had the same phone number since I was at the prosecutor's office. It's 440-320-3096. That's my cell.
Okay.
I do have a Facebook page that is Tony Cillo for Prosecutor, and I do answer messages, and I have people that are in the midst of designing a website so that it'll be easier to get a hold of me as well.
Okay, well, that's great. I am, and Lorain County voters should be grateful that someone with your background and experience is running for Lorain County Prosecutor, and I wish you luck in the election.
Well, I did not make the decision lightly, but what has been going on in that office is troubling to me after 27 years. The $100,000 for a scandal that they won't tell anybody what it was spent on at this point, or trying to hide it. You got to have transparency. I think what's most important for people to realize is that the office has to be bigger than the person that occupies the office, because if the public loses confidence in the office, it can take years to get it back.
Understand.
So you are the steward of the office. You're not the prosecutor forever.
Okay, well said. And I ask this of all the interviewees, what makes sense to you and what doesn't?
How do you mean?
Well, in summary, all things considered...
I think what makes sense to me is you do the job because you want to do the job, because you have passion for the job. I don't believe that people can do things they don't like well for a long period of time. You can do it for a while, but if you really enjoy it and it's really something you feel strongly about, which I do in this area, I think you can do a good job for a long time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for appearing, Tony. And thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, email addresses, phone numbers will appear on the bottom of the screen. You can use those. If you would like to appear on the show, or if you know any interesting people that you think would want to appear, just send us those contact information, and we'll take it from there. And remember, seatbelts save lives.
The preceding program was presented to you by a community producer. The statements, views, and opinions expressed were not necessarily those of ALC TV or the City of Avon Lake.